Chapter 3, 1951, page 20. Why can't I go to school? My words became one long shriek, and judging by the way my father's nostrils flared, it wouldn't be long before I'd be punished for being outspoken. Yet again. Why should my brothers be allowed to continue and not me? I had so much to learn, and I wanted to be even better in French, my favorite subject. Besides, school was the only time I talked to my friends without Vittorio shadowing my every move. This piece of freedom would soon be robbed from me. Tears filled my eyes. Life was so unfair. Papa let out a long sigh, his knuckles whitening from clenching his fists. He was struggling to keep his calm. Because that's the way it is, Bianca. Your sister had already left school and is learning how to cook and sew. She'll make a good wife, and when you marry, I want to be proud of you too. Blazing rage built deep inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I had to keep the magma down, otherwise I'd regret it later. The last time I exploded was because of Vittorio telling on me, and I had to stay home for over a week. Was talking to a boy in the piazza a crime? To Vittorio, it obviously was, and needed to be reported back to my father. Life was never easy with my parents. Papa set his strict rules, and my mother abided by them. He was the decision maker. He was the decision maker of the family's general direction in life, and my mother organized the house like an obedient servant. I reckoned Vittorio could do no wrong in my father's eyes. Papa had ambitious plans for him. He wanted my brother to become a school teacher and planned to send him to the best schools in Naples, which would cost an arm and a leg. My father didn't mind. I, on the other hand, couldn't even get to finish normal schooling. In a nutshell, Vittorio did what he wanted. He even dealt with his sisters as he pleased with our father's blessing. Heat rushed through my veins, fueling my anger. All I did lately was argue with Papa to avoid my brother like the plague. I wish I'd been born a boy. Then I could do as I please. That's not true, Bianca. Isn't it? Well, Vittorio thinks he can. A splay of conflicting emotions played across Papa's face. Anger, guilt, even remorse. No reply needed. His face said it all. He swallowed hard. Scuola Media is finished for you. If you wish, I'll see that you learn a skill. Your mother can teach you how to embroider. She's gifted with her needles and crochet. Florinda has learned a lot. Didn't he understand I didn't want to sew in a circle with the other girls from the village, embroidering sheets for someone's wedding bed, chatting about what they'd cook for supper or the bargain they had managed to unearth at the local market? That wasn't the life I dreamt of. I wanted to make it to the top of the fashion world, create dresses for a top designer, and find the love of my life one day. No one lived in fairy tales. Novels were written to entertain, perfect worlds stitched together by words everyone loved to hear. Stories never became reality, unless you were really lucky. But at least I could hope to choose for myself. Tears prickled my eyes. If my father had his way, I'd be jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, escaping from his dictatorship to that of my husband's. The school year finishes at the end of the week. You've got time to say goodbye to your friends. I opened my mouth to rebel, but it was useless. Papa turned on his heel and left the room. End of another lost battle. There's a quick break in the story here. Time has moved on. I stepped through the tall, rusty gates. The metal chain had been unfastened and hung limply from the base of one of the black spikes. I avoided brushing against the dusty bars and gazed up at the school building. A building I'd never walk into again. It stood proud despite the trauma of the war. Roof tiles were missing, and some of the stones had come loose from the cement on the front wall. Nothing compared to the building next door, though, which was no more than a shell. Inside, shadows cast by the dull grey walls replaced the sun's strong rays. Like stepping into another world. At least it was cool. It wasn't a big school. Some classes were even split into several age groups, requiring the teacher to prepare different lessons for each section. Despite this, and the reputation of exercises, we were all eager to learn. I loved it here. My shoes scuffed on the beige marble tiles, which had once been the pride and joy of the school director. Now, most of them were chipped, some shattered, and yet they were beautiful all the same. I quickened my stride along the empty corridor. I pushed open my classroom door and zigzagged to my seat next to my best friend, Anna, at the back of the room. Although a born moaner, Anna and I were on the same wavelength and could count on each other. Whenever I was under the weather, she picked me up with her encouraging words and comforting hugs. Likewise, when her brother had died in a motorbike accident a few years back, shattering his family with heartache, I'd been there for her. I slipped into my seat, and my bottom lip began to tremble. It's my last day at school. Anna squeezed my arm, ready to burst into tears. For me, too. It wasn't so much the stone and mortar of the school that we'd miss, the emotions and memories we'd built up over the years spent here with friends. No more playing in the schoolyard. No more laughing and joking. If we were lucky, we might both learn the same trade and stay in contact. Later, we may even marry someone from the same village. The hum of high-pitched voices buzzed like a swarm of excited bees until our professore entered, silencing the room. We all stood while we stepped onto the wooden dais. Behind her, the rough painted wall once covered with framed photos of Mussolini now lay bare. Dark-colored patches showed where Il Duce once throned. Proud as a peacock with hands on hips in his black shirt and pale grey uniform. Good morning, our voices chanted as one, despite most of us rolling our eyes. At least we no longer had to stand and sing with our arms extended in a salute and shout, Vive el Duce, or wear huge yellow ribbons in our hair. Signora Bendetti was a nice enough lady who knew her stuff and had a firm hold on the class. Must have been the hawkish air about her. Even her nose curled into a beak. From behind her black-rimmed round glasses, her azure eyes never missed a thing. Like most women of her age, she had her hair tied back in a tight bun, giving her an even stricter look. Anna leaned sideways to whisper in my ear, bringing me out of my reverie. Do you think Signora knows her husband is cheating on her? She asked. A gasp escaped my lips. Where on earth had Anna got that from? And why has she brought it up now? Why do you say that? I whispered back. Anna pulled her pencil case out of her bag and sat it next to the school books in front of her. Your husband was seen coming out of Donna Lucia's house late last night. How do you know that? I just do. And it's not the first time. I chewed the end of my pencil, all the while eyeing the professor. I'm gonna get this word right. Professoressa. There we go. That must be the Italian for professor. Or maybe the female Italian. I'm not sure. Professoressa. Most men had mistresses. Even our neighbor Emilio did. Not surprising either. Everyone got married. No one divorced. With most marriages being arranged, it wasn't easy for either partner to remain together for years on end. If my father chose my husband from me and it didn't work out, why would my other half take a mistress? Would my other half take a mistress too? Was this me in 20 years' time? I settled back in my seat and gazed at her. She sat as straight as an arrow, ready to fire away from its bow. Her face gave nothing away, although the lines around her mouth etched unhappiness. At the end of the day, whether for love or an arranged match, getting married was a leap of faith and hope for a joyful married life. A gamble with no sure-shot way of predicting its success. Even though some arranged marriages did work out, I wanted to choose my own partner. I already couldn't choose to stay on at school. Was I asking for too much? School finished at 4, a lot later than usual. Maybe to allow all the girls who were leaving to say their goodbyes. Although we were prepared, it was still hard to accept. A few of our classmates would continue studying. They were the lucky ones. For me and Anna, 15 was too early to leave and learn a trade. Not for our parents. A lump formed in the back of my throat as I gathered my books, shoved them into my bag. I wouldn't need these again. Well, maybe my sketch pad and colored crayons. They followed me everywhere. I enjoyed drawing. Mainly people and clothes. My art teacher once mentioned my good eye for perspective and creativity. At least with no more school to attend, I'd have more time to sketch. Arm in arm with Anna, we wandered down the long stone corridor and out into the summer sun. Come to my place, she said, squeezing my arm. Mama will be pleased to see you. We can have a last limonada and panettone together. I gazed into her pleading eyes. We were both in the same boat. Her position worse still. Since her brother had passed away, she had no company. School was the only place she spoke with people of her own age. I'd like that, I said and kissed her cheek. As soon as I'd accepted, I knew I'd made a huge mistake. Within minutes, my mind screamed, "What have you done?" Vittorio would be furious that I'd done something of my own without letting him know or without asking Papa's permission. But I might never get to speak with Anna again. Who knew what our parents had in mind for our future? Strolling arm in arm, began to sing one of my favorite songs. You've got a good voice, you know, Anna said. I laughed. Papa says so too. He often hears me singing when I do the housework. Help us pass the time. We continued skipping along the cobblestone road. both chanting at the top of our voices. Heads turned. A few boys whistled, and an old lady patted my shoulder on passing. Out of breath, we stumbled to a halt, and Anna turned to me, a pensive gleam in her eye. Your voice is good enough to become a singer, Bianca. A nervous giggle escaped from the back of my throat. Don't be silly. I'm not. With the right teacher and the right music school, you could go far. I let out a heavy sigh. Not going to happen, and you know it. We can't even stay on in a normal school. But imagine your name in lights in the top opera houses in Venice or Verona. Her arms gesticulated as she made her point. Bianca Lombardi, prima donna Napoli. I pulled down her arms. Stop putting silly ideas in my head, or I'll start believing you. You wait and see, she said, grabbing my hand and pulling me into a sprint. We haven't heard the last of your singing yet. Thank you for that, Redeem Funky. It is nice to whisper, no? Si. Ciao, Bella. Anna's mother greeted me with a big hug. We chatted at the kitchen table while sipping our drinks and nibbling fresh cake. Anna's cousin, Paolo, joined us, and after half an hour, I was enjoying myself too much to think about Vittorio. I'd worry about my brother later. Paolo made me laugh. What a charmer. In fact, he made us all laugh. We listened to his stories, memorized by his low, warm voice. The smoothness of his tone wrapped around me, hypnotizing me with the way his lips moved. I finally snapped out of my stupor and peered down at my watch. Hell, the hour I'd planned to stay had rolled into 2. Anna's mother caught the worry on my face and turned to her nephew. Paolo, you can't let Bianca walk home on her own. It's getting late. Of course, Zia. It'll be a pleasure. Anna, you go too. It won't be right for Bianca to be alone with Paolo. My friend pushed back her chair and tossed her jacket over her shoulders, with Paolo stood and grinned. I kissed Anna's mother goodbye, wishing I could stay longer. Thank you, Signora. I've had a wonderful time. We stepped out of the house, and like a huge velvet curtain pulled across the stage, my happiness disappeared. A shiver tiptoed down my spine. The warmth Anna's family had brought me had vanished behind a menacing grey cloud. A menacing cloud named Vittorio. By the time I reached home, the sun had gone down. My heart raced as a familiar figure caught the corner of my eye. Vittorio was leaning against the wall in front of the house, hands thrust into his trouser pockets, a cigarette wedged between his lips. He had that malicious look to him, the one that meant trouble. Thanks for walking me home, I said to Anna and Paolo. You don't need to walk me right up to the front door. Anna looked over my shoulder and nodded. Are you sure you'll be all right? I smiled and hugged her close. Of course. Paolo shook my hand, and they left arm in arm. I waited a few seconds before heading across the piazza to my house. Where have you been? Vittorio pushed away from the wall and stubbed the cigarette under his foot. Where do you think I've been? Don't test me, Bianca. His voice was no more than a threatening whisper, and I felt the danger before I saw it. Vittorio's eyes shot out bitterness and hate as he strode up to me. You should have been home ages ago. Who have you been with? Before I knew it, his fingers sat dangerously on my skin, soft enough not to mark my neck, but hard enough to enforce his words. I tried to shake off his hand. He slid it onto my shoulder and dug in his nails. A sharp squeal escaped my throat, while a loud snarl sounded in the back of his. Trembling, I lifted my chin and met his furious gaze. He didn't flinch or move his eyes from mine, but an evil grin stretched across his angular features. I don't want you going anywhere without me or Papa. Is that clear? He added a little more pressure with his hand. Is that clear? My legs failed me, yet I held his gaze. At only 18, Vittorio behaved a lot older than his age. For sure, being given certain responsibilities from our father to look after his younger sisters had given him confidence. All his power had gone to his head, and all because Papa wanted us to be brought up like proper young ladies. Again, Vittorio squeezed my shoulder. Bianca! Luca came rushing up to me and pushed Vittorio aside. Mama wants me to pick up some pomegranates from the garden. Can you come with me? My oldest brother released his hold, and I took a step back. Of course. I ducked out of Vittorio's reach and hurried through the house into the back garden. Luca followed, hot on my heels. He reached for my hand and squeezed it tight. I had to be blind not to pick up the tension between Vittorio and me. Luca was only 10, yet so mature for his age. Poor boy had been left to grow up on his own. Mama too busy looking after Fortunato, our youngest brother. Born prematurely after the frightful situation when the Germans had come looking for Papa, she'd given birth 2 months too soon. Although Fortunato had come a long way since, he was such a sick boy and needed extra care. Luca didn't mind, or if he did, he didn't show it. He never complained, never raised his voice, never cried. Such a good-natured boy, by far my favorite sibling. Holding hands, we stepped into the garden and headed to the back corner where my grandmother had planted the pomegranate tree. God knew when. Its thick, sturdy trunk stood proud. Although it hadn't grown tall, it looked like a giant bonsai. When I'd asked my mother why Nana had chosen to plant a pomegranate tree, she replied it was a symbol of friendship, success, and prosperity, and that seeds should be eaten in abundance because they were supposed to bring good luck. Maybe that was why I loved the fruit so much. Luca squeezed my fingers, and we both collapsed under the tree. He sat like an obedient dog at my feet. Taking 2 ripe pomegranates, he handed me one, then changed his mind and handed me the other, the biggest. I prayed he'd always remain an adorable, loving person, and not grow up to be like Vittorio. I snapped the fruit open with my fingers and crunched into the mass of red seeds. Its nectar trickled down my chin. I wiped away the juice with the back of my hand and grinned at Luca. His face mirrored mine, sticky, red, and tasty. I threw my head back, giggling until tears crawled down my cheeks. I couldn't make out if they were tears of joy or despair. With the back of my hand, I wiped them away and froze when I caught Luca's watery gaze, while color drained from his face. What's wrong? I asked, automatically looking over my shoulder. Had Vittorio stepped onto the scene? It's your face. He stretched out a hand and wiped my left cheek. Looks as if you're crying tears of blood. I dabbed my finger onto my cheek and saw the red stain there. They're pomegranate tears. Sweet, happy tears. He nodded and went back to nibbling his fruit, satisfied with my answer. I tried to keep my emotions under control, in spite of them getting the better of me. Unhappiness had settled itself on my chest, eating away at me, but I tried to keep it under the surface. I shook my head and took another mouthful of the pomegranate, letting the succulent fruit flavor my mouth before swallowing. Maybe I was asking too much of life, looking for something out of my reach, something that didn't exist. Are you happy, Bianca? Luca peered up at me, his brow wrinkled. With a wide smile pasted on my face, I reached over and smoothed out the furrow between his eyes. What was the answer to that question? Sadness was eating away at me inside. We all experience that from time to time. For some, it was temporary. For others, like me, it was continual unhappiness and hopelessness. I tried not to show my emotions, but at times anger took over, and I screamed out my frustration. Luca dropped his half-eaten fruit and dashed into my arms. You aren't going to leave me, are you? I rocked him in my arms, hugging him close. Why do you say that? I'm happy here. With my eyes fixed on the highest branch of the pomegranate tree, I allowed my silent tears to trickle down my cheeks, soaking the collar of my jacket. Who was I trying to kid?